Thank you, Dr. Papadopoulos, for that wonderful intro. Dr. Papadopoulos, discipline, has been a strong guiding hand in my oration and has shown me not just a professor who I think can guide someone in discipline intellectually, but has been an example in discipline in many ways of his life. I'd like to also thank Dr. Grove and Professor Hamilton for guiding me also on this incarnational journey, quest, if you will, on the path of discipline. Without further ado, I'll lead us in a prayer and get us kicked off. This is a short excerpt from the book of Job. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with strength? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrible. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, and the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Our Lady Queen of Peace, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Let me begin by positing firstly that this oration will not change your life. Secondly, what I am advocating for is not some ancient secret for success. It is a very simple concept. Thirdly, if you want your friends to like you, your possible significant other to empathize with you, or your grades in school to necessarily improve, perhaps this oration is not for you. Today I'm talking about discipline. Discipline. In our culture, there seems to be a constant and indeed positive focus on the word. A quick internet search reveals figures such as Jocko Willink, Jordan Peterson, or Joe Rogan speaking on the importance of discipline in the life of the everyday man. It seems that amidst the hedonism and self-seeking cycle of consumerism, men and women are beginning to realize that our culture's recipe for happiness is severely lacking. We as a species need structure, and not simply structure in some vague political sense of the word, but structure in the most basic sense. Wake up to your alarm. Make your bed. Make a schedule. Create time in that schedule for exercise and study. These are simple principles that we seem to have forgotten. In the name of creativity, our culture gives license to pursue whatever activity you may desire, with the result being mediocrity in the workplace, family, and everyday life. But in order to regain excellence, this creativity must be stifled. Let me give you an example. If I want to build muscle in any part of my body, say my arm, I must put that limb under concentrated periods of stress for extended periods of time so that my very muscle fibers break down and they grow back stronger. This is what Jordan Peterson means when he says, you must channel your vision in order to expand it outwards. Like building muscle, in order to master excellence in any craft, you must put your whole body under stress, under the function of discipline, so that you can arrive on the other side a better, stronger version of yourself. I've been playing violin since I was 4 years old, and my teachers would make me play for an hour a day, every day. up until I was about 19 when I came to college, when I no longer had teachers. And before I could play the magnificent Bruch Concerto, they would make me practice the most mundane, boring exercises for hours and weeks and months before I could even open up the first page of the concerto. They knew that I had to be equipped with the necessary skills, however boring, in order to master excellence in this larger, more beautiful thing, the Bruch Concerto. And this is discipline, that you must forego short-term desires for the sake of long-term goals, delayed gratification rather than instant gratification. In order to explore what discipline is, I will argue that there are three fundamental types of discipline man must acquire. First is martial discipline, discipline traditionally imposed on an individual for the sake of state or some outside or otherwise political end. The second is discipline as found in the intellectual life, intellectual discipline. And the third and highest form of discipline is that discipline that arises from the conjunction of both our body and mind. And I call this kind of discipline self-discipline, for it originates from self. I will further give an account of the role that our emotions, our passions play in the life of a disciplined man. First is martial discipline. As I briefly noted, this is the most brutish and basic form of discipline, often imposed on individuals such as soldiers for the sake of some outside, more noble end. Take, for example, a great wild stallion roaming the plains of the West. He is truly wild, powerful, and terrifying to behold. But then a man decides to catch a stallion and train that stallion for war. He spends weeks, months, training this great beast, submitting him to endless training drills and repetitions. Finally, the horse is ready for battle. His wild and aggressive energy is not lessened, simply channeled for a very distinct end. This end is victory in battle. And this is the fundamental concept of martial discipline. Martial discipline is taking men who are like that stallion, wild, powerful, and unfettered, and training them for a very specific task. In the traditional sense, this task is war. Most men who have this positive masculine aggression, unless disciplined, do not use this positive aggression for a higher end, and instead invest it in base pursuits such as illicit sex, drugs, and gang violence. If you do not think that most normal men are disagreeable, unless disciplined, simply take a look at your 17-year-old self. If you're a man. If you're a woman, that's a little bit beyond my expertise. You probably disobeyed your parents, got your mom very angry at you, your siblings even more, and were generally just a fairly disagreeable person to be around. Hopefully, later in your life, you were disciplined to the point where you can now be a welcomed member of society. I think Xenophon would have understood this concept well. Now, Xenophon was first a student of Socrates and pursued the intellectual life for many years before he joined the Greek army as an observer, which we would call like a modern-day reporter, perhaps. He constantly underwent extreme forms of discipline with his men. His main works are recounted in the book The Anabasis, in which King Cyrus, the leader of the Greek army, leads 10,000 men on an offensive mission into the land of Persia. But along the way, King Cyrus and his men and his generals are killed in battle. His officers are murdered through treachery. What was once an offensive mission now becomes a retreat mission, and Xenophon must take leadership of the troops. He constantly had to instill discipline in his men under extreme circumstances such as cold weather, snowy mountains, river crossings, fear, and the constant chaos of battle. There's a couple instances that I found in the Anabaptists that spoke particularly to martial discipline. Finally, the troops have arrived in a new land called the land of the Macedonians. Certain Greeks allied themselves with the local barbarians in order to acquire plunder. They leave the strict discipline and structure of the Greek army and charge the Macedonian stronghold in a disorganized and undisciplined fashion. The results are catastrophic. Within seconds, many of the Greeks and barbarians are instantly killed, and the rest flee. But what many could view as a military disaster, Xenophon sees as an important lesson in martial discipline. He assembles the troops and addresses them as follows: "Men and soldiers, do not be dispirited on account of what has happened, for know well that a good thing has also occurred, one of no less importance than the evil. Those are the Greeks who were heedless of staying in order with us and who held that they were competent to accomplish with the barbarians the same thing they do with us have paid the penalty. They will consequently be less inclined to leave our battle order again. But you must prepare yourselves in such a way that even to those who are your friends from among the barbarians, you will seem to be better than they are. And for those who are your enemies, you will show them that they will not be fighting the same sort of men as when they fought those who were in disorder." It is a simple but painful lesson for the Greeks. Those who try to pave their own path in the name of creativity, when the stakes are high, will ultimately be defeated. But how does this lesson apply to us as moderns? Like the Greek soldiers who followed the short-term goals and were killed, we need to start treating our undisciplined actions as having real and concrete consequences. Perhaps not waking up to your alarm or not exercising or not sunning does not immediately have consequences on our life. But over time, this following of our short-term desires compounds, and instead of becoming the stronger, better version of ourselves, this following of our short-term desires instead destroys those long-term goals. Like the Greeks, who did not follow the discipline that was imposed on them, not following our undisciplined actions has real consequences. Further, in order to master this martial discipline, we can't really do this on ourselves. We often have to have this strict discipline imposed on us by others. Xenophon understands this well. During a long winter march, one of his men sits down in the cold. He refuses to get up, even though the enemy are in close pursuit. Instead of empathizing with the man, Xenophon strikes the man, pushing him to stand up and keep marching. What could be viewed as an extreme act of violence or aggression on the outside is actually an extreme act of discipline. Xenophon knows that if the man listens to his body and sits down in that moment, he will not accomplish the long-term good of victory in battle or retreat. Instead, he will succumb to his short-term desires and be killed. This lesson, again, has many implications for us as moderns. In order to acquire martial discipline, we need to surround ourselves with people who are our betters, our superiors, in order to master a certain craft. If I want to master, say, a swimming stroke, say freestyle, I would be very wise to subject myself to a coach instead of trying to pave my own path in the name of creativity. If I tried to swim on my own without a coach, I guarantee I would not learn how to swim well, and I would spend countless hours wasting my time in the pool. But a coach, a man who is better and stronger at me in swimming, can, like Xenophon, who strikes a soldier to drive him to accomplish his long-term goals, I can become the best swimmer that I can be and accomplish my long-term goals of swimming. Rather than surrounding myself with people who are lesser than me in order to master excellence, I must surround myself with people who, like Rudyard Kipling says in his poem, If, truly force my heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn long after they are gone. All right. Perhaps it may seem that I'm advocating for some sort of alpha male or cold-hearted stoic lifestyle, but I'm not. Things like exercise or waking up early not only form my body, but more importantly, our minds to perform to the highest degree possible. In my short 22 years of living, I've noticed that most men either form their minds or their bodies, rarely both in conjunction with any sort of vigor. And this is because we are afraid to be exposed in our weaknesses. Plato writes, "Those who devote themselves exclusively to physical training turn out to be more savage than is good for them. And those who devote themselves to music and poetry turn out to be softer than is good for them." As humans, we must find the balance between forming our bodies and minds. For a physically inclined individual, the best way to build discipline in the mind is through pursuing the intellectual life, pursuing studies. Pursuing studies builds discipline in our mind through building calluses in our minds. Just as digging in the dirt with a shovel builds calluses in your hands so that you can shovel better and longer, perseverance in studies builds mental calluses. The French philosopher Antonin-Gilbert Sertillanges writes in his work, The Intellectual Life, "You must bring to your work constancy which keeps a task steady, patience which bears difficulties well, perseverance which prevents the will from flagging." Sertillanges is clear that in pursuing intellectual life or pursuing an arduous reading or study assignment, you must persevere in the arduous task at hand instead of quitting midway through and getting distracted. He even compares pursuing hard or rigorous intellectual pursuits to forcing yourself to exercise. He says, "At the beginning of a walking excursion, it often happens that the first steep ascent finds you inert and breathless. You're inclined to give up and go home. But if you keep going, the muscles act freely. Just the chest expands and you feel the light of activity. It is the same with study. You must not yield to the first sense of fatigue. You must push on. You must force the inner energy to reveal itself. Little by little, the mechanism gets into play. You adapt yourself, and the period of enthusiasm may follow on the first painful inertia. Whatever may be the cause of your difficulties, you must go through them without flinching, keeping self-mastery." Sertillanges is clear that self-mastery and perseverance and having a never-quit attitude are not just mindsets that we need to have when we're working out or doing something physical, but this mindset of perseverance directly correlates to pursuing things that build the mind. Building this mental fortitude, as I noted, builds calluses in our minds so that we can take in more information over time. So how do we practically build this sort of intellectual or mental discipline? It's quite simple and very practical. Instead of allowing yourself to browse the internet midway through a study session, force yourself to just read 2 more pages, just a little bit. Over time, that perseverance tricks our minds and allows us to read even more and take in more information over time. It's actually the same in exercise as well. If you want to get stronger, instead of taking a break midway through your run or your gym session, force yourself to just run for 5 minutes more than you would normally. Over time, this forces our mind to realize that we can push past our former weaknesses. This is the whole concept of mental discipline. All right, at this point, I've outlined both physical discipline or martial discipline ordered at forming the mind and martial discipline ordered at forming the body and mental discipline ordered at forming the mind. But being forced to exercise because your gym rat roommate drags you out of bed at 5 a.m. and says, work out, that's not true discipline. Nor is being forced to study because you're scared of a teacher or you want to get an A in a class. That's not true discipline. But studying because you truly desire the goods that result, that's true discipline. Waking up early because you truly desire the goods that result from working out, that is true discipline. This is called self-discipline. Now, self-discipline arises from both habitual training in both martial and intellectual discipline. Further, self-discipline arises when our will and our desire lead our body and mind. Our body and mind are united in our will and self-discipline. Self-discipline comes about not through other people forcing us to be disciplined, but because we desire to be disciplined and have trained ourselves. Self-discipline, yes, it's fundamentally a choice, but rather it arises through training. St. Thomas illustrates that self-discipline is directly related to habit. He says in quote 6, habit implies a disposition in relation to a thing's nature and to its operation or end, by reason of which disposition a thing is well or ill disposed thereto. Being forced to exercise and study by another, as is found in martial and intellectual discipline, properly disposes us to acquire the habit of self-discipline. Further, self-discipline is also brought about through rigorous training. Thomas also writes in quote 7, man has a natural aptitude for virtue, but the perfection of virtue must be acquired by man by some kind of training. We can't just acquire self-discipline overnight. It's ridiculous. We as humans, in order to master self-discipline, must be trained. And this means submitting ourselves to the painful process of both martial and intellectual discipline, the disciplines ordered at forming the body and the mind. All right, so that's self-discipline. But perhaps it may seem that I am framing the disciplined man as emotionless, more of a machine than a relatable human. But I would argue that the disciplined man is truly most in tune with his emotions. His emotions are completely in line with his long-term goals. His emotions do not prevent him from letting his short-term desires dictate his choices. He's able to employ even emotion as a tool to help him accomplish his goals. Let's go back to Xenophon in the March of 10,000. As I noted, Xenophon strikes the lazy soldier. What may seem like an act of pure, passionate anger is actually self-discipline at its highest. Xenophon is able to conjure up that feeling, that passion, in order for that soldier's long-term good. He strikes a soldier, and everyone else thinks that he's actually being angry. But he's actually doing that out of the soldier's long-term good. This is what the Navy SEAL commander Jocko Willink means when he talks about default aggression. Default aggression is the ability to fall back on our emotions when our reason limits us. He writes, emotions, in quote 8, emotions and logic will both reach their limitation, and when one fails, you need to rely on the other. When it just doesn't make any logical sense to go on, that's when you use your emotion, your frustration, your anger, your fear to push further, to push you to say one thing, I don't stop. When your feelings are screaming that you've had enough, when you think you're going to break emotionally, override that emotion with concrete logic and willpower that says one thing, I don't stop. Fight weak emotion with the power of logic. Fight the weakness of logic with the power of emotion. I think as humans, we naturally think that most of our inability to accomplish our long-term goals is due to some kind of emotional weakness. But I would argue that our inability to accomplish our long-term goals, be it getting the new job or starting a relationship or even running a marathon, is due to fear. Fear that we rationalize. We say things like, I really don't have time now that it's hard in my schedule to run anymore. All right? It's too hard. I'm going to tell all my friends that it's too hard, and they'll all know that this is a reasonable based decision. It doesn't work in my schedule. Or I'm not going to apply for this hard job because, my resume, now that I look at it, is really not complete enough. I really don't have the experience needed to get this new job. Over time, we rationalize our way out of our decisions. This is not emotional weakness. This is cold logic overpowering our long-term goals that we knew were good for us. That's when we use our emotion, as Jocko Willink says, our fear and frustration to fight that logic that's telling us to stop. Find that passion deep inside of you that says one thing, I don't quit. No matter what my mind is telling me, fall back on that emotion, that passion, that anger that once held your attention, and use that to accomplish your goals at hand. We as humans are both bodies and minds. We have the unique gift as a species to be both like animals and like angels. Those of us who live more through our animalistic side need to have that side of us disciplined through training. But those of us who live more through our minds need to summon that great animal, that Sally inside of us, when cold logic limits us. Through training both our bodies and minds in martial discipline, we can be truly said to have acquired self-discipline. That kind of discipline that results as us making the decision to be disciplined in our own life. This is what Jocko Willink, Navy SEAL commander, means when he says, discipline equals freedom. Working out because someone drags you out of bed in the morning, that's not freedom. Studying because you simply want to please a teacher or out of fear, that's not true freedom. But working out because you truly desire the goods of result is freedom. Studying because you truly desire the goods that result from studying, that's true freedom. It seems like over the last 100 years, society has quelled the animal inside of man's soul, making a man who is domestic rather than dangerous, whose apathy is greater than his ability to attack life. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. We are in the midst of this cycle. Good times create weak men. So what do? It's time to stop rationalizing on the sidelines and actually get in the arena. It's time to actually embrace the hard life of discipline that doesn't start in a glamorous way. It starts by waking up to your alarm clock at 5 a.m. It starts by working out. Small actions. It starts by reading just 2 more pages of that arduous text that you thought you couldn't complete. when YouTube looked just so appealing. Quote 10, "It wasn't in a war, it wasn't in a battle, it isn't in a melee of fire and destruction that most of us succumb to weakness. We are taken apart slowly, convinced to take an easier path, enticed by comfort. Most of us aren't defeated in one decisive battle. We are defeated one tiny, seemingly insignificant surrender at a time that chips away at who we should really be. It isn't that you wake up and decide, that's it, I'm going to be weak. No, it's a slow, incremental process. It chips away at our will, it chips away at our discipline. We sleep in a little later, we miss a workout, then another. We start to eat what we should not eat and drink what we should not drink. And without realizing it, one day you wake up and that becomes something that you would never have allowed. Instead of strong, you're weak. Instead of disciplined, you are disorganized and lost. Instead of moving forward and progressing, you are moving backwards and decaying. So where do we go from here? It's not one big step that destroys us as humans. It's many small submissions to our short-term desires that destroys our discipline. So make the commitment to be better. Make the commitment to pursue the path of discipline. Embrace the arduous path, one morning at a time, one miserable workout at a time, one arduous text at a time. And you will be the man, as Rudyard Kipling writes, who can truly force his heart and nerve and sinew to serve their return long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in them except the will which says to them, hold on. Thank you.